This is a real-life story set in a vast land, the San Luis Valley of Colorado. It's a huge, flat prairie flanked by mountains and far off the beaten path.
Add to that, too, the mystery of seeing remote settlements while driving through and wondering who on earth would live out in the middle of such a vast space in a little tin can or a wooden lean-to. I mean, the most basic shelters, and who would subject themselves to that and why?
That's author Ted Conover, talking about the questions he tried to answer in his new book, Cheap Land, Colorado. On this, Desideratum. A desideratum is an essential thing. I'm audiobook narrator Teresa Bakken, and I think this story is full of essential things. Like wide open spaces, what to do with a rattlesnake, the peace you find in silence, and the need for connection.
Hi.
Hi. How are you?
Oh, great. I'm so happy to see you.
Likewise.
Where are you?
I'm in Riverdale, which is part of the Bronx in New York.
Ted Conover lives part of his life in New York City. He's perhaps best known for spending a year as a prison guard at the maximum security prison Sing Sing in New York. The book he wrote about that experience was called Newjack, and it earned a National Book Critics Circle Award and made Ted a Pulitzer Prize finalist. His work expands and deepens what we think of as journalism. He submerges himself in often uncomfortable situations and then takes readers along with him. Today, we're talking about his latest immersive experience and his book called Cheap Land, Colorado. In his observation of small details, side by side with his big picture, geologic and historic perspectives, he paints a very complete picture with his own voice as narrator in your ear.
It's not hard to picture the indigenous people who carved images into rocks near the rivers, or the Hispanic people who established Colorado's oldest town, San Luis, and a still working system of communal irrigation in the southeastern corner, or a pioneer wagon train. Pronghorn antelopes still roam, as do feral horses and the occasional mountain lion. It's also not hard to see a through line between the homesteaders of the 19th century and the people who move out there today.
Okay, so that's where we're going to start our conversation with Ted, talking about the people on the prairie.
Being there put me in mind of settlers who would endure all kinds of privation in hopes of finding, land they could own or gold they could mine or a life for their family. That's a pretty resonant theme in American history. And when you're there, you can feel it. A large number of them, I think, at this point are trying to get away.
There's an escape.
Exactly.
It's a freedom from and a freedom to live the way you want to live.
Exactly.
But also maybe fleeing from a horrible past.
Yeah, absolutely. That's been a theme in the American West for a long time, right? Getting away and starting fresh and trying to leave behind a previous version of yourself or a life you lived and starting fresh. So that all happens. And then this particular part of Colorado is one of the few places in the country where you actually, can buy 5 acres of land for not very much money. And that's definitive in a way. That's why I called my book Cheap Land, Colorado, because it's cheap. You go online and Google 5 acres San Luis Valley, and you'll find 24 websites with plots, from $3,500 to maybe $7,000, which I don't think exists elsewhere in Colorado and not much elsewhere in the United States. Places that nobody really wants to live because they're hot and windy and far from things. But if you go there, you can be your own landlord.
Yeah.
Right? You can avoid paying utilities. You can avoid law enforcement in most cases if you have a reason to want that. You can grow marijuana, at least in Colorado. And so you have various kinds of freedom that a lot of people seem to seek.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really loved in the book that you included pictures. And so I was going to ask you that one of the first pictures in the book, and this is within a few pages of you explaining that title, which you just brought up, Cheap Land. The first time I saw it come up in the story, I think Matt says it, that he had Googled Cheap Land, Colorado.
Yeah.
And so you show a picture of Matt's place in that page. And it's stunning. I'm going to ask you to try to explain what a place. So someone buys this cheap piece of land. When you drive out there, what do those homesteads look like?
There are a small number of actual houses, stick-built houses on some kind of foundation. So it's not all ramshackle temporary structures, but I'd say mostly it is.
Yeah.
And a lot of them start as an old RV. Like I think where Matt was living was either an RV or it was a camper from the back of a pickup that had been built onto. And so it's just a shell really. Or maybe it's a larger trailer. But Matt's at some point had been cut in half and expanded in the middle. A wood stove had been stuck in a pipe, a chimney pipe installed through the roof. And that's really typical, these jury-rigged shelters that are barely insulated. And if the windows work, you're lucky. They're drafty. Very few people have wells for water. It's a rough way to live. And Matt actually rented his place from a couple that lived about 50 yards away. And that picture, you can't tell in the book, but the whole end of that trailer is covered with old license plates. So it's got like 50 colors. In the book, it doesn't show all the colors.
Yes, but you can tell there are license plates all over the edge of it. It lends itself to this sort of it looks nomadic.
Right.
Like it feels like feels nomadic. It feels like it's been plopped down there. The other thing that's in that photo is you can see the majesty of the mountains. You see the peaks with snow on them, and you see them rising out of this flat land.
Right.
And yet this looks so rustic, so it doesn't look survivable, really.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like you could make it, like a human being would be too frail to survive a winter in that small structure without any insulation. And I guess, that gets me to what you did while you were there, or what organization that you tapped into while you were there, is this La Puente Rural Outreach.
Yeah.
That is tasked with connecting with these people and making sure they're not freezing to death, right?
Right. That in a word, that's their goal, is to keep people alive.
Yeah.
And they started, I think, with the deaths of some homeless people in Alamosa, the biggest town in the valley, which is sort of famously cold in the winter. And there was a nun and some other concerned citizens who thought, this shouldn't be happening. It would not be too hard to start something that give people without a place to sleep a place indoors to sleep. So that was the beginning of La Puente. And it has grown over the years in various ways. It has a food bank and a program for kids from troubled families and all kinds of great stuff. And they had just started this rural outreach program. And the whole idea was, with more people moving out off grid, solar panels are getting cheaper. and cell phones let people feel connected to the world, even though they live out there. And people were moving out when it was warm and then having to bail when it got cold, because if you haven't really focused on the challenges of off-grid life, you could make some bad mistakes. And if you yourself are frail, or if you have a child or a partner who's not healthy, you're not going to do well out there in many cases. And so they thought, well, let's help some of these folks before they show up at our homeless shelter. Let's see if we could help them get firewood, like through the Public Utility Commission in Colorado has this whole fund to provide firewood or propane to people of low income. So help them apply, help them get food if they run out, or prescriptions if they don't have gas money and they need their insulin, or
just a lifeline, just a small, thin lifeline. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, little things. If people hit a rough patch, until their next check comes, they're stuck. Well, give them a hand. So I'd heard about this from my sister, who worked for a foundation in Denver that was thinking of giving money to La Puente. And she said, this kind of sounds up your alley. So I paid a visit and met Matt, who you mentioned. He was the rural outreach worker for La Puente, which is kind of crazy because his territory is like the size of New Jersey. And it's one guy with an old Ford Ranger pickup truck. And I said, well, Matt, do you think you could use a hand? Could I volunteer to help you? Would you like that? He said, oh, that'd be great. So then I asked La Puente how they felt and how they would feel if I wrote about it. And they asked me a few questions, as they should. And I explained that anybody I write about, it's not going to be a secret. I'm going to say I'm a volunteer for La Puente, but I'm a writer. I'm here because I think people would be pretty interested in how you do it. How do you get by, and why did you make this choice? And so, it'd be like my second visit. I'd say, when I come back, could I interview you? And occasionally people say no, because you meet people who are kind of skeptical, shall we say, out there. I mean, there's a lot of people who don't trust journalists. They don't trust city people. I mean, much less a New Yorker. That was like such a burden to have to explain.
Yeah, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? Yeah, skeptical, afraid, really, sort of things born of fear too,
Totally. That's totally it. But, there I am. I've got this old truck. There's nothing fancy. And I always make clear that they know, this is kind of my approach as a writer. I have the good fortune to be educated, but there's all these things I know nothing about, like how to survive off grid. I know so little. And if you, Miss Off-Grid person, could help me understand, I'll write it down, and I'll use your lessons in my own life. So that's kind of my style, is I ask to be educated. And most people out there are not used to being considered an authority in anything. And so a lot of them will talk.
Yeah, it's actually such a great lesson to come from a place of curiosity too. That, oh, I see you've done this, and how did you do that? And not a place of it's not nosy. It's curiosity,
I do know, and I also know the thing I struggle with is their fear of being judged, because there's like people missing their teeth, or people who haven't taken a bath in a while, and they know that they carry a stigma, right? They know that if they walk into McDonald's, people might look at them or have an opinion about them. And so I have to make clear, I am not here to judge you. I'm here to learn. And that's a kind of important step, and it's not automatic. And you find that you bring prejudices unconsciously, right? Like the whole teeth thing. It's hard not to think, why haven't you fixed your teeth? why don't you have dentures? You're only 30 years old. Or like Stacy, the mom of the family I rented from for a while, she asks me, "You're probably wondering about my teeth." And she says, "I want you to know it's not from meth." And so that's an association people know you might make, and they want to head it off. And there's so many issues like that. We carry a lot of judgments and stereotypes, and becoming conscious of them is a big part of doing this kind of work.
Yes, I would say that reading this, it's clear to me that you came to the place with a sense of awe and respect for the hardship of it and curiosity. And also, I think because of the connection to La Puente, this idea that we're stronger together, or that we lift each other up.
That's it, exactly. I think you said you worked as a journalist. And so that traditionally journalists are not supposed to get involved.
Yes.
Right? You're not supposed to join the group to report the story. Your power comes from your independence. But seems to me, if you're reporting about people who are struggling, there is nothing wrong with lending a hand. And in fact, it would feel bad not to. You'd feel like you're just some kind of cold observer if you have a way to help somebody and you're not doing it. That kind of sucks, really. Right. I just don't want to be that person. I don't want to be that person asking those questions. So this made me comfortable because I'm trying to help. And then I think, people appreciate it. So that was kind of my approach.
Yes. One of the things I love that happens to you through this story, because you are also kind of a character in this book.
Right.
This is an immersive experience. You share with the reader your experience, not just the people that you are meeting along the way. And you start off and you're just a few yards from the family that you're renting from, and you're sort of immersed in their family life and what's going on with them. But you come to a point where you kind of double down and you're like, I think I'm actually going to go all in on this and buy my own piece of cheap land, Colorado.
Yeah, so it just seemed like a natural progression. Like, here I am, I'm a renter, and I wasn't actually the only renter on that property. As you know, I'm just a few yards away from a couple that has arguments, and they like to drink, and I'm thinking I'm back in the Bronx or something. I'm in a place where people come because they can own their own land. So maybe I should just do that and enjoy the quiet. And so it wasn't for a couple of years, though, that I did that because all lots are not the same, right?
Right.
I was looking for something in specific. So I was looking for a lot that would be near somebody I knew and trusted, so that if I have a little trailer there, the odds improve that it won't be gone when I return, because that happens out there. Things that are not tied down, and even things that are tied down, disappear.
Yeah, there was a story about like the actual axles get removed from one, like the thing is turned upside down and the axles are removed while the person's gone. And so, yeah, your safety is dependent on others.
Yeah.
And that was also a surprise to me. I guess I didn't expect that this remote lifestyle, that people that chose that would then be sort of connective tissue with each other.
Yeah. You're right. You think, they don't talk to each other, but that's the furthest thing from the truth. They're like in each other's business, even if they can't see the place over the hill, right?
Yes.
There aren't that many roads in, and there aren't that many people, and you tend to somehow be aware of what's going on. And people use Facebook Messenger, even if they only have one bar signal. Messenger lets you text or call if the signal's better. And And you'll find people, who are going into Walmart early in the month. Do you want to share a ride? Could you buy me some dog food? There are benefits to having neighbors. So anyway, I waited till I found a piece of land that seemed right, and then went for it. And I still own it. My great fear is, just like you mentioned, Teresa, I'd return from being away and I'd find this ancient trailer that came with the property. I'd find it on its side with its axles removed, because Matt told me they're solid steel. They're worth $500 each. And I'm thinking, it would just break my heart if that happened, because I've put a lot of work into like excavating this trailer and getting the mice out and making it livable. And I still go. I suppose another author would be on to the next thing, but I'm not ready to leave. It's part of my life at this point.
Yes, there was a part in the book, and I think I even wrote it down because I thought, oh, wow, he's really not just doubling down on this immersive reporting experience, but you find a sense of yourself there, and that it was different from other immersive reporting. So the people who have followed your stories in the past know that you've done this kind of years-long, large scope, big picture understanding of things. And you do that in this book. We get deep down history of this region and the layers going back of why things are the way they are, and why the land is divided and cheap the way that it is. But you also come to this place where you're like, I want this experience to last. And what I thought was so funny in that section was you start talking about how time is measured. And you're in Colorado on your land there, and you bruise your thumbnail, and the time that it takes it to grow out is how I was like, oh my God, the time is measured in fingernail growth. But there's a pace of that, right? That's very different from the other parts of your life.
There is. But that I'm embarrassed to say, in trying to repair my fence, I have mangled my fingers with the hammer more than once, but it's like a souvenir I take back to my city life. And I get to, measure how long it's been since that happened by watching my fingernails. But to your point, I'm best known for a book where I became a New York State corrections officer, and I worked in a prison, in Sing Sing prison, for almost a year. And I could not wait to get out of there, because that is such a stressful environment, and corrections officers are under so much, especially the new ones like me, just under a lot of pressure from prisoners who kind of want to intimidate you, and from older corrections officers who want to intimidate you. Mm-hmm. So it's really stressful, and I was so happy to leave there every single day. And I'm so sad to return the next day. And in the San Luis Valley, it has not been like that. Mm. I can have enough of solitude, and I can have enough wind or terrible weather that I'll happy to get back to another place, especially sometimes a place with humidity, because it's so dry there that, my sinuses dry out and I start sneezing, and I miss the muggy New York summer. But apart from that, I really like being there. I like who I am there. I'm more relaxed. I'm less anxious. And it's a little bit of a memoir along with a cultural exploration.
Yeah. There are lots of stories in this, lots of characters, lots of real people. One of the most harrowing stories that I was just going to ask you to retell a little is that you have to relocate at one point a rattlesnake. And one of the things that I thought was fascinating about this is what you just mentioned a minute ago, and that was about Facebook. So you use YouTube in your problem solving with this rattlesnake problem.
Oh, yeah.
And that part of it was intriguing to me. I don't know why I didn't expect to find social media in the San Luis Valley.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess first tell me the story of the rattlesnake and how you solved the problem. And then I want to know your thoughts about social media.
Sure. So my property has a couple of old sheds on it. And as I was walking by a shed one summer day, I heard a sound that just made me stop in my tracks. And I think in our ancient brain, right, we know what that means when we hear a rattling.
Yeah.
I was just like, what could that be? And I've been expecting to see one for a long time. This wasn't until the third year I was there that I'd seen countless ones dead on roads, or, their heads cut off by my neighbors. Everybody kills them instantly because they worry about their dogs. They worry about themselves. They're very anti-rattler. I, being a different kind of prairie person, did not want to cut off its head. But nor did I want it to be right there where I put my old paint cans.
Yeah.
So I did go to YouTube, because if you can get a good enough signal out there, YouTube can help you fix a barbed wire fence, or, as you know, just about anything. And there's so many different people on YouTube who will tell you how they catch a rattlesnake. And you kind of have to figure out what's your style. Are you going to be the macho Texas snake handler who has big boots and a special clamp and, but at the last minute grabs it with his hand? Or are you going to what? I settled on this Wisconsin school teacher who found a snake in his woodpile and heated up a piece of PVC tubing in his fireplace into a crook that he could lift the snake with. And he puts it in a 10-gallon drywall putty container with a lid. And then he puts it on the passenger seat of his car and drives it to a park. I took it to BLM land, which there's a lot of down there. And it's across the Rio Grande River from me. So I thought that's pretty safe. But, if I'm mocked by my neighbors for anything, it's the fact that I do not kill my snakes. And they just say, well, they may think you're smart in New York, but we know dumb when we see it,
Yeah, I think what I loved about the story was that it's there. You talk about that region of our brain that knows this is bad. This is bad.
Yeah.
And how then, though, you have an appreciation for it, right? Like you notice it's sunning, like you go back, keep your distance, but you actually do sort of a curiosity reconnaissance kind of observational journalism with it. Right?
You're right. I wanted to take my time and understand it. Like, when does it come out?
Yeah.
When does it want to be in the sun? When does it go away? And it would clearly go away into a hole under my shed. You could see. And the first time it saw me, it rattled its rattle for, I don't know, a couple minutes, and then it slithered back under the shed. So it doesn't want to fight, right? It's not looking to tangle with.
It's not aggressive. No,
it's not. And so, hey, live and let live, right? I don't have a dachshund who's going to get bit by this thing. And I don't have a child. If I did, I'd feel differently.
Right.
I'm just a guy who should be able to look where he's going. And
we should be able to live and let live.
I think so.
I thought it was a great example of that. And I thought the idea that you went on YouTube and that there were multiple options, like you said, there were many different ways to deal with a rattlesnake. And you found one that suited you best. And it had to do with creating sort of a shepherd's hook out of PVC and relocating said dangerous beast. And that felt right. That felt like the right thing to do. But at the same time, I was also just thinking, I just don't know if I could have, how terrified I would have been to in the process of it. Like I this is a tangent, but my son and I decided to do honeybee keeping.
Oh.
And we watched YouTube videos and we went to a club and we learned everything we had to learn. And then we got the nucleus of a colony in the back of our pickup and brought it to our property. And we had to set it up. And in the physical doing of the, you open the lid and the hum of these bees they know they're in the wrong place. They don't know what's going on. They're worried. This volume of panic from thousands of stinging insects had like a physical effect on me. I was like, I don't know if I can do this.
But it's so riveting to approach something dangerous like that. And some part of you is reassured that this is rational. People do raise bees.
Right.
People do catch snakes. You're not crazy. And yet your heart's going. And I have an editor, my book editor for Newjack, the prison book, said, I've noticed that you keep being attracted to these dangerous subjects.
Mm.
And I said, yeah. And he said, so I think the thing about you is you're counterphobic. You want to overcome your fear, and you put yourself in he's my editor, being a New Yorker through and through, he's totally into psychoanalysis and all this, but he,
looking for the deeper meaning.
But I'd never even heard of the word counterphobic, but yeah, it means like interested in overcoming a fear. And I get that. And it's true. And it's like anything that goes wrong when you're writing nonfiction, it's fun to write about, right? Like any challenge, any stroke of bad luck. The silver lining is this will be fun to write about.
Well, and some of this I felt like life is stranger than fiction. I think at one point maybe it's Matt or maybe it's Lance that says, you can't make this stuff up.
Oh, yeah. I know.
And I guess, I don't want to hold up any one character as what a train wreck. I think I really love when your story intersects with Zara's. And one of the things that I loved about that intersection was you get to a place where we know how immense this valley is, and yet through the people, it actually feels small. And one of your connections to Zara is that Paul, another person in the valley, has also given her a plate of candy. And so as you're getting to know her, you realize you share this connection with another person.
Right.
And
it's so cool.
It's so cool.
Zara's a single mom with 4 or 5 kids from Chicago. She worked as a housekeeper in a hotel. She had an abusive husband. She bails. She rents a car from Enterprise and shows up on the prairie at a half-built house with this guy. He's part of a movement to build a new community of Africans in the diaspora, and she's all into Black power, but he's not a good guy either.
Yeah.
And so her neighbors, who are mostly white people, end up being really helpful to her as she extracts herself and finds a place to hide from him. And Paul, who, as you recall, introduced himself to me by saying, yes, my name's Paul and I'm gay. I just said, wow, okay, let's get it out there. He says, you've got to meet her. He helped me set up an interview. And then, yeah, when she describes how Paul shows up at her shack with this paper plate and Christmas cookies underneath a wrapper with that curly ribbon tying it, I'm like, oh my God, that's what he brought me. And so, yeah, you feel this kinship with people from another universe, basically, because you're just spending time in the same space being human together. And so I love that stuff. I love seeing unexpected things in common and just seeing people who are admirable where you least expect it, right? Like somebody determined to make herself a better life and willing to really go through so much on the way to that So not only, does she go into this area of white people with all these very pro-African views, very strong political views, but then she moves into Alamosa months later. She's the Colorado representative of the new Black Panther Party. She's got this tattoo of the African continent with yellow, red, and green stripes on it, visible under her collarbone. And what does she do? She falls in love with a cowboy from Monte Vista who's smitten by her, and wants to help her tie her roller skate when she's at a roller derby practice in Salida. Yeah. And now they're married. I mean, you can't make it up. And it's kind of fantastic that I live in the same world as them.
Yeah. I enjoyed her. I thought she could be her own book, actually.
Totally, she could. She could probably write it herself.
Yeah, and I think that Paul is one of the people who threads through your time there and is kind of one of those connective tissue people. And he, like everyone else, really doesn't fit a mold. And I think that's something you sort of alluded to at the beginning about not judging things, right? Like, don't make a judgment that everyone here is X, Y, and Z, right? Because there's Paul, and as soon as he meets you, he says, I'm Paul and I'm gay. And his own way of saying, like, I'm different than what you're expecting. I'm not who you think I am, right?
I think that's right.
And then for me, Paul becomes someone that helps you find meaning in this whole experience through being able to see Paul's humanity, but also to see his frailties. And it also really points out the value of what La Puente does, which is, lifelines to people.
Yeah, Paul, he's quite open about being needy in certain ways and having fragile emotional equilibrium, and he reaches out for help,
Yeah.
Yeah, he's doing well right now, but it's cyclical, and everybody knows this, all his neighbors, and even the conservative Mormons up the hill, who are his nearest neighbors, look out for him.
Yeah.
They probably don't appreciate a lot of his lifestyle or way of looking at the world, but it's sort of unexpectedly diverse. And because of that, people who are unlike each other are kind of put in situations where they might have to deal with somebody quite unlike them, more than I do in New York, actually.
Yes.
So that's a surprise too.
Yes. I was thinking that. I was thinking that in major metropolitan areas, there's an anonymity that allows us to then insulate ourselves in our own bubbles, for lack of a better word, right?
Yep.
But not there.
Yep.
All your Venn diagrams are overlapping. All of your bubbles are bumping into each other.
That's right.
And it is, for me, that was one of the big picture themes of the book. Right? Yeah. Was that what's happening right here is a lesson about the divisiveness, is an example of the divisiveness. You certainly run into divisiveness, but it's also a lesson in maybe how we overcome that from this fringe.
Yeah, I agree. And that was completely unexpected to me. I thought, this is the fringe. It's going to be full of angry people who are sick and tired and don't want to deal with that kind of person or that kind of person. And instead, it's its own world where not everybody wants to connect, but a significant number do. And they are each other's social world. And there's rifts, there's feuds, but there's people who have little, my house caught fire. Well, stay on my couch for the next week. That happens all the time. Or I hit a deer, I hit an elk. I'll drive you into town to, or I'll take your kids to school, or, people with kids especially, I think, try to find ways to coordinate and look out for each other. And that was a surprise. my very first hint of it, back to the beginning of the book, is when I would be driving around, like making cold calls at these properties where I didn't even know if anyone was home. And, out of 5 places I meet somebody who will talk to me. And then the next day I meet somebody else and start to explain who I am. And they say, oh, well, I know all about you. I know you tried to knock on the door of that place that's been empty for 3 years. Like, they'll tell you, everybody in a place like that pays attention to the vehicles that drive by. And mine was kind of distinctive. And so, yeah, immediately you're known that way. And then the next day you're known because they're going to Google you.
Yes, I did want to come back to that social media, the prevalence of it there, in some ways you spotlight how this is a negative, right? That the misinformation and the mistrust and the fears that can be stoked by a source like Facebook, because it's used as a source of information and then also as a place of grievances. I think there was a part of the book where you're there during parts of COVID, and I think people have trusted you. You've been going there often enough now that you sometimes will have an answer to something that they're like, well, I don't know about that. I'm really skeptical. I don't know what to believe. And yet you're a trusted source, right? But the other source they've had is Facebook.
Yeah. So you got to tread carefully there, because there's a lot of offhand remarks that might strike you as unkind or hateful about from Anthony Fauci to Hillary Clinton to Barack Obama. There's lots of people who are sort of held up as straw men, right? Like bad.
Yeah.
Or, go brand and all this, like all that stuff is very much on Facebook. And a lot of my neighbors share it, but I've got to say a lot of them don't. And the real engagement on social media out there, it's mostly Facebook, and mostly it's, people posting about something that happened. And sometimes they'll just say, oh God, not again. And that's the whole post. And then somebody comments, what happened? And there'll be a whole thread about the brake line leaked and my truck broke again. And so it's both a way to bind people and let them share their experiences. And then, there's that connection to the anger of our political situation right now, which makes me not want to go on social media.
It's so interesting that it works like a local radio or a local newspaper or classifieds or a bulletin board in a grocery store.
Totally.
If you were going to tap it back to some other form of communication, but instead of having to go into town and get the latest from the grocery store, that form of social media works like an information system.
Totally does.
Is a positive. It helps keep people connected.
Yeah.
But then when it's utilized as what's going on in the world, and you already have sort of this level of mistrust of government and police, and I mean, not even a level, but like a massive amount of mistrust, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's fascinating that you could see the positives of it.
Oh, yeah. And one of the things people love to share is like the sheriff's office Facebook page will tell about a fugitive, right? Or a missing kid, or, some shootout somewhere. Be on the lookout. And that gets shared a lot.
It's spread like wildfire. Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe it's less like the telephone game.
Yeah.
You could go back on the thread and read everything. You know exactly what Bob said because it's right there.
Exactly.
And it's less maybe of a
You're right.
corruption of information because you can go back and read it. Yeah.
You're right. Well, if you compare it to telephone, that game where you pass on a message and see how distorted it gets by the fifth or sixth person, it's better than that. And yeah, it is amazing how smartphones and social media have made even these remote prairie dwellers, I'll get messages. Have you seen that duck in Central Park?
Oh, because they're connected to you and they're watching what happens in New York because they're connected to you in New York.
Yeah, they just think, oh, this happened in New York. You must know about it because you're in New York. You must know about that duck.
Yeah.
Or here's a mural somebody painted in the Bronx. Is that close to you?
Wow.
Or the whole during COVID, like numbers of people dying, people would ask me, is that true? Is it true that hospitals have these refrigerated trailers outside because there's so many dead bodies? And actually, my neighbor works at one of them, and he was telling me exactly that. So I said, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
It's killing a lot of people. I don't know if it'll always kill a lot of people, but a lot of people are dying. I can tell you that. So I'm cautious. I'm so cautious with politics because it just seems you throw a match on a pile and an argument begins. But I do think my experience out there shows how much I have in common with them, how much we all have in common if we can get past the noise.
Right. Yes, that's a great point. One of the things that you've been really generous. I'm gonna try to wrap it up. Towards the end of the book, your neighbor Robert has an auger, and you're putting in a fence, and you end up bartering.
Yeah.
It was a mind shift. It was a different way of seeing things that was already in place when you got there. And it just felt to me like at that point in your time there, it just was an automatic almost for you to consider a barter.
Yep. And one of the things I really love about that is it's just so human, right? It's not about data or numbers or something with a decimal point. It's like, here, I don't need this. You need that, but I could use that.
Yeah.
And so it's a transaction that's more personal and that you're going to remember, right? And maybe you'll repeat some version of it. And it's like earlier you were describing how unique Matt's dwelling was. And in a way this is not cookie cutter housing in a suburb. This is like incredibly individualistic solutions to how do I stay warm in a harsh environment. And you think, oh my God, that's scary. It's so poorly made. But on the other hand, it's so real and it's so human. And you see somebody who's put together this house out of 200 different sources of thrown out material. And you have to give it some respect.
Yeah. Well, the last question I always ask has to do with the name of the podcast. So I named it Desideratum. It's based off of a poem, Desiderata, because it was full of good life lessons. And Desideratum itself means essential thing. So for you, and you could answer as you traveled through this particular immersive story, or just in general for you, if someone says, what's essential? What is essential to you, Ted? How would you answer?
Well, here are some essential things from my book. Land is an essential thing. Listening is an essential thing. To write this book, I listened so much. Mm-hmm. And then the space, the place is so big and something in it communicates opportunity and potential and hope. Mm. And I know Desiderata is about sort of, it's go placidly, right?
Yes, go placidly amid the noise and haste and remember what peace there may be in silence.
Right. Well, the peace there may be in silence is a part of it too, because peace is what people seek and I think often find out there. And silence is another part of it. Yeah, that's not too hard to draw some connections to.
Yeah, love that. Thank you.
Thank you. You totally get my book, and I find it very gratifying to talk about it with you. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed getting to know Ted Conover as much as I did. I want to thank the Colorado Sun for shining their light on Ted's work. I listen to the Sun's podcast called The Daily Sun-Up, and every Sunday, I check out the Sun Lit feature at coloradosun.com for author spotlights. Sunlit editor Kevin Simpson often talks to authors on the Daily Sun-Up's Friday podcast. Check it out at coloradosun.com or wherever you're listening to this podcast. Ted will be in Denver for the Colorado Sun's Sunfest Ideas Conference. I'll put a link for tickets in the show notes. And I'll link the La Puente organization Ted volunteers with so you can find out more about the good work they do. One more big thank you to the audio publisher, Random House Audio, for the excerpt from Cheap Land, Colorado. And as always, thank you for listening.